the time I was almost eaten. Let me tell you a story of what happened to me in the old country years back. I was part of a good-sized family, 3 brothers and my father. My mother died years back. We weren't very well off though. In fact, we were struggling to even put food on the table. Desperate times call for desperate measures, so my father decided that I would be married off. He would find me a suitor who could help support me but also help out the family. One day, handsome man came around their town. He was someone new that no one had ever seen pass through town before. Apparently he lived a ways outside of the cities and towns, in the middle of the forest. He said he had a large home and a few staff who helped care for the home. He lived out in the wilderness because he enjoyed the quiet time, and since he had the money to do so, he left the city and built a home in the serenity of nature. My father found this man quite the catch and decided to arrange for him to marry me. But I didn't want this. First off, I didn't agree with the old customs of arranged marriages. On top of that, I just felt like something was off about this man. My father would not listen to me when I tried to protest and explain my concerns. He just said I was being emotional and needed to stop dreaming of marrying for love, as that is a rare thing to be able to have. The rich man would come to town every week to meet with me, following a sort of courting process as my father watched over us during the visits. The man kept asking me to come visit him at his beautiful home in the forest. I kept putting him off as I didn't feel comfortable around him and I felt safer being in my town where people could watch over us during his visits. Eventually, however, my father became loose with chaperoning, and he began encouraging me to go see this house as it would soon be my home as well. After weeks of pressure from my father, I decided one morning I would go. I just wanted the incessant nagging to stop. Still, I felt like something was off about this man. To be safe, on the way out of the house I gathered a bag of ribbons for the trip. There were no roads in this forest, so the journey had to be either by foot or bicycle. My fiancé said he would spray a path in the forest with some of that paint made from cornstarch, and I did see the markings, so I followed them. Just to make sure I could find my way home, I would stop and tie a ribbon to a branch along the path as well. Something inconspicuous, but I knew where to look for it. Eventually, I came up on a log home. It wasn't very new looking, or very fancy, so I wasn't sure if this was the correct place. I was about to turn back around for home when I saw an older woman come out of the house to grab firewood. I walked up to the woman and asked her if this was the home of my fiancé. The older woman suddenly had a look of fear and sadness in her eyes as I told her I was to marry this man. The old woman grabbed at my arm and began to speak, her voice strained with sadness. "This man is a cannibal. You must hide. He will be coming up that path you came from any moment now. He and his brothers are likely planning to kill you and eat you." The old woman rushed me inside. I was worried that this could also be part of the trap too, but I was caught in the moment and couldn't think straight after what I was just told. The old woman told me to hide in the cellar behind a big box that she pointed out. I decided to try and sneak away from the home after the old woman walked away, as this whole thing just seemed so crazy and I wanted to go home. I quietly snuck up the stairs of the cellar, but soon heard a bunch of men laughing and causing a huge ruckus as they entered the log home. I quickly looked around the place and saw a pantry near the cellar entrance. I slid into the pantry and closed the doors, holding my breath as I prayed they did not see me. I watched through the slats on the door to the pantry. I saw there were 3 men, one of them being my fiancé. They had with them a pretty blonde girl who seemed to be enjoying their company. They started handing her drink after drink, until the girl was either intoxicated or drugged. I wasn't sure because the girl passed out fairly quickly on the sofa. Once she was out, the men looked at one another. I watched as their faces changed to that of pure evil. They dropped their facade of fun-loving guys, and their true selves could be seen. They grabbed a tarp, rolling the girl onto it, then grabbed axes and other tools and began to hack away at her, cutting up meat for their dinner. As they were slicing up this poor girl, they were also pocketing her jewelry. There was a gold ring, however they could not get off one of her fingers. So one of the men used a hatchet on it to try and get to the ring. As he slammed the hatchet down onto her hand, the finger went flying and rolled right into the pantry. I quietly gasped, clutching my hands to my mouth as I did so. I very carefully pushed myself up against the side of the wall near the door to try and conceal myself in case the door was opened. The man got up and started looking for the finger. He clearly didn't see that it rolled into the pantry. As the man started edging closer to the cellar door, the old woman, who they had stoking a fire for their dinner, called out to him to look for it in the morning. The man agreed as he wanted to enjoy his meal with his brothers tonight. The men made the old woman cook the meat and serve it to them. As I watched this, I also noticed the old woman pouring them drinks from the same bottle as they gave the girl. Was she trying to drug them for me? I asked myself. The old woman did not eat or drink anything. I was getting the impression that this woman was a prisoner of theirs they were using to serve them. The men soon passed out, snoring loudly. The old woman shuffled her way to the cellar door to look for me. I stepped out of the pantry instead, almost causing the old woman to scream of surprise. The old woman held a finger to her lips and waved her hand, signaling me to move quietly. We both slowly maneuvered our way out of the kitchen. This home was not very large, so the men were very close to our feet as we walked to the door. As I got to the door, of course, I tripped on one of the boots strewn about. It made a bit of noise and I stood there frozen in fear. One of the men grumbled and began to move. I thought I was caught. But luckily there was a sudden crash of thunder outside. The man seemed to decide in his sleepy, possibly drugged state that it was just the rain and he laid back down. The old woman helped me out the door. I pleaded with her to come with me, but the woman explained that this was her home and they had her husband hostage somewhere. She had to do what they said, or they would kill him. I nodded in understanding and told her I would send help. I began my escape through the forest, unfortunately caught in a downpour of rain. The rain washed away the marks of paint, but with each lightning strike I was able to spot the ribbons I tied to branches. It took a while, but eventually I navigated myself out of the woods and back home. When I came home, I told my father what had happened. My father did not believe me though. He said I was telling tall tales because I didn't want to be in an arranged marriage. I pleaded for him to believe me, but he dismissed the conversation and walked away. What I didn't know at the time, one of my brothers overheard the conversation. He thought it was such a strange story to make up and he decided he would go to the authorities after work the next day. I fell asleep for maybe a couple of hours before hearing someone knocking at our door. I heard my father answer it, and then my blood ran cold as I heard the voice of my fiancé. He was speaking in his fake pleasant tone. I listened in for a moment, worried he knew what I witnessed last night. Thankfully, it seemed like he was just there to visit and try and encourage the wedding to happen today. My father came and got me from my room. I begged and insisted that I wanted my father to stay with us today during this visit. I convinced him that he should come with us to help plan the wedding. My father agreed and thought it was a grand idea. As the day progressed, we arranged for everything at the local church. I then insisted that the family have an impromptu engagement dinner and that my fiancé should stay for the night to eat and celebrate with the family. My fiancé agreed. As we all ate dinner, I had planned my final stand. I began asking people what they dreamed of last night. As everyone exchanged stories, I smiled politely and waited patiently for my turn. When everyone was done telling tales of their dreams, I smirked as I began to tell the story of the dream I had last night. I will tell you about my dream. It was about you, I said as I looked over at my fiancé, who smiled in kind. I was walking alone through the woods when finally I came to a house. But it looked old and worn. I wasn't sure if it belonged there. But then I saw an old woman collecting firewood, so I went up and spoke to her. I looked over at my fiancé, whose face was beginning to change, a look of worry just peeking over his brow. I gave him a look of reassurance and said, "Don't worry, darling. It was only a dream." I continued to tell the story of my dream. I asked the woman if my fiancé lived here. The old woman suddenly looked so fearful and began to cry out that I was in danger. She said my fiancé planned to chop me up and have me for dinner. She had me hide as he would be arriving back, so I hid in the pantry. I soon heard them come barreling through the door with a girl in tow. I watched as the poor girl passed out, and the men began working away at her to make meat for their dinner. I paused and looked around at the table. Everyone had put down their cutlery out of disgust, and my father began to look angrily at me. I smirked though, ignoring the dagger stare from my father, and I continued telling the story. One of the men couldn't get a ring off the poor girl, so he hacked off her finger. But it rolled away from him. The finger, as it turns out, rolled right into the pantry. I looked over at my fiancé, whose face had lost all its color as he looked panicked. I then reached inside my pocket, stood up and announced, "And this is the missing finger." I held the finger up high to show everyone, the finger with the ring still on it. My fiancé got up and began to try and escape. My father, suddenly realizing I was telling the truth, became red with anger and jumped on the fiancé, pinning him to the ground. Just as this scuffle was taking place, my older brother was coming home from work, and he happened to have the authorities in tow with him, for he believed my story from the night before and had plans to help me after work. The authorities arrested the man and went to the cabin and arrested the brothers as well. The old woman got her home back, but unfortunately they lied to her. They had killed her husband that first night. My brother and I decided to move far away from our homeland and start a new life in Canada. Neither of us speak with our father anymore after what he did. What I saw still haunts me to this day.